Welcome to the 21st episode of our podcast. I think we are now legal drinking age in some countries. Nick Granville in Wellington, myself in Auckland. Nick, it's been a little bit more than a week. How have you been?
Good, thanks. Good, yeah. It's our 21st birthday. I can't believe we got to 21 of these. That's awesome.
Yeah, man.
That's great.
Getting there.
Yeah, no, everything's good. And you? What's going on?
I'm good. I did a bit of a cleanup of my room. As you can see, things have moved around. In the process, I found a couple of things that I'd been meaning to send you. The treble bleed cap network and
Oh,
this
yeah.
5751 tube. So those are getting sent out to you on Monday morning.
No worries, man. All good.
I moved this Marshall around here because I thought I'd take it out. I haven't taken it out of the studio room for a very long time now. And I've got a couple of friends who we get together for a jam maybe once a year and just, play some 60s and 70s rock. So, tools for the job, taking this and this little, well, it's not quite a half stack, it's more like a 3/4 stack or something. Oh,
That's the 212 Marshall,
yeah,
right?
it's this cab called the
212?
2061CX that came with the 2060 120 watt head. But the head was smaller, right, than the cab. And I just happened to have this 24-inch wide Marshall clone. Actually, it's made by this company called Rocket Retro in St. Louis in the US. And at the time, it was a very reasonable price. I think prices have gone up now, but at the time I got it, it was like a really well done. I think it's based on the old Metro kits that used to be available. But everything's really, hairboard transformers and, everything's hand wired inside, looks like the deal. And I think at some point I, started futzing around with the preamp tubes because that does make a big difference. And I had come across this stack of old Mullard ECC 83s, yeah, that went in.
Oh, yeah.
So the most sensitive is the first one. In any tube amp, the first valve position is always the one that makes the difference, which is why when you put this in your Fender style amp, it's got 70% of the gain of a normal 12AX7. So what that does is it chills out the preamp a little bit, and when you turn the amp up, it's more like the power amps, working. It's not as compressed. So some people like that. For me personally, I like the little more excitement of a 12AX7. So that
Depends on the application, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, if you get to turn a super reverb up to around 8 or something, then yeah, that'll make sense. But it's very rare that I have that luxury.
I mean, in my basement when I had a 12AX7 in there, I found you could get the volume to about 3, just past 3, and it would start breaking up. But with the tube I had in there before, which I think was a Y7, I could get the volume about 5 or 6 before breakup.
Yep.
And quite a different character to it. Actually, a more pleasing character with the Y in the basement.
If I'm not mistaken, the original basement circuit is with the first one's a 12AY. And then people started
exactly.
popping AXs and saying, oh, this sounds more hot rodded or whatever.
Yeah, well, this is a Victoria. My one's a Victoria, so it's built like a 59, as close as you can get to them, hand-wired. The guy that builds them even has the original transformer winding machine that that he bought from Fender, the one they used in the 50s and 60s. Right. So it's as close as you can get, but it does make a huge difference. That you're right, that first input tube, because it's feeding everything else after that, isn't it?
Exactly. And then the second and the third ones, they do have some effect, but you kind of have to really listen to, know what to listen for, rather. Yeah. It's kind of hard to describe in words, You kind of just spend time doing it, and then you think, oh, that's what happens. The power tubes, I found at this point, getting NOS ones is like stupidly expensive, like way more money than I'm happy spending on, what I don't perceive to be a huge difference. The only time is like you really hear them is when you've got the amp, cranking. Like if you're doing into a reactive load like I am right now, then you can get away with it, But on stage, even with the post phase inverter master volume, it's kind of dropping the signal before the power tubes, but after the phase inverter. Because apparently a lot of what you perceived as Marshall power amp distortion was actually the phase inverter. And then they found how to chill out the signal after the phase inverter, and then the power tubes are not running as hard.
Alexander Dumble never used new old stock, and apparently he didn't like them. He always was always a guy that used like regular tubes, like standard. You know, he didn't think that, he thought the whole NOS thing was a load of crap. Apparently, and I mean he had monster ears. So
here's my take on it. Now, if you're buying amps that were made in the '60s, then it may be a good idea to use tubes that were made in the '60s, because that's what those amps were designed for. But if you're using modern amps that were designed with modern tubes, well, even that 9th gen Shuguang tube, which was like the industry standard, you know, that's going to become collectible at some point, I'm guessing.
No, I totally agree. That's actually a good way to do it.
Yeah.
Old amp, old tubes, new amp, new tubes. Yeah. Totally agree.
I had a 67 Pro reverb, and in that, those old Sylvanias, they really shined. You know, you could hear like, now it's happy now. And in the Bella, which was designed with modern JJ, and I put the Sylvanias in them, I was like, oh, it sounds cool. And I was like, nah, I'll just put the JJs back. That's what they were meant for.
Well, sometimes too, it's a good idea to just leave tubes that are working alone.
Yeah.
That's the other thing I found, because I remember swapping tubes a bunch of times in my basement, and I had new old stock at one point in there. And the new old stock that I had in there were really expensive, and I don't know that they lasted any longer, or to me it wasn't that much. I didn't notice it. They were better. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't, but I forget what I have in there now, but they're decent. They weren't cheap tubes at all.
Right.
6L6s, of course, but it's been reliable, so I'm like, leave it alone. Because tube amps can be a bit finicky sometimes with tubes. Once you get them, just got to get them working and then leave it alone.
Yeah, true.
As long as you're getting a sound you like, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Oh, it's pretty full on for me at the moment. It's, I've got We Will Rock You at the moment, and we've got 2 shows today. So a 2:00 show and a 7:30 show. So it's pretty full on. We had a show last night.
I saw some pics you posted. I quite liked your costume.
Oh, yeah, it's funny. They said to me, we would really like to dress you up and all that. And I was like, no, not going to happen. And she goes, oh, what about a ribbon? Maybe we could just tie a ribbon off your side. And I made an excuse. I was like, no, I've got a wireless pack for my in-ears on this side, and I've got a wireless pack for my guitar on this side. It'll just get tangled. Oh, okay, well, how about you bring some jeans in and we'll just distress them? And I'm like, yep, I can do that. And she said, have you got any boots? I said, no, I haven't got boots because I knew they'd be uncomfortable. Oh, well, we'll buy you some. I was like, okay. So they bought some Converse knockoff and put paint on them and what have you. And then she goes, would you mind wearing a T-shirt? And I'm like, yeah, I'm wearing a T-shirt anyway. So they bought a Led Zeppelin T-shirt, and I was like, cool, at the end of the show, that's the one thing I want. So what does she do? And she goes and cuts the bottom off and cuts the sleeves off, and I'm like, oh, you've ruined the one thing I like. And then she wanted to put a flannelette top over it, but cut the sleeves up and made it all look, like, okay, whatever.
Why do you think rock musicians wear tattered clothes? They don't.
I know. And then she said, how would you feel about wearing a top hat? And I said, wrong show. And I go, that's Slash's look, And she goes, oh, no, it'll be cool. There's all this. I'm like, no. I said, I'll bring a hat in. And she put this dumb feather thing in it. I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, I can handle that. After the first night, the makeup lady comes and sees me and says, you look really awesome on stage. It was cool. How would you feel about a little bit of eyeliner? And I'm like, hell no. I said, all those TV shows I did, I wouldn't let them put makeup on me. And, that was when the camera was like right up in my face, I'm not doing it now. I'm like, hell no, it's not going to happen. I mean, I'm on stage for Who Wants to Live Forever.
Yeah.
And they've got the 2 actors in the front, and then they shine the spotlight on me in the background. Kind of like the video, playing that solo for 8 bars. Mm-hmm. So it's like I'm at a distance at the point, and then the only one I really come to the front of stage is for Bohemian Rhapsody, right? And I come right to the front of the stage. But it's like 16 bars. Nobody gives a shit if I got makeup on or not. It's like they're watching them, and I've got a hat on, so my face is kind of shaded. I'm like, yeah, give me a break.
It's a good thing they didn't make you wear that frilly thing that Brian May used to wear in the 70s.
Yeah, they would have if they got away with it. I think that these music theatre people kind of have an idea of rock from a music theatre lens. Yeah. And it's like, no.
It's the cartoon
most rock
version.
people I know wear maybe like a black top and a leather jacket and who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
Right?
So
it's all too nice.
Shall we get down to some real rock then? And because I want to show you what this thing sounds like. just straight in. I think.
Yeah, let's hear it.
I may have.
Have you got it?
That's on my.
What volume have you got it on there?
The amp is on 8 on the.
And are you running through your aux or straight into
it's going
the
into the
speaker?
reactive load and then through the aux, which is on some 4x12 vintage 30.
I was going to say, because for anyone listening and not watching, you're sitting right in front of it. In a Marshall on 8, you're probably not going to be sitting in front of it, right?
I wouldn't be looking this happy. I'll be suffering some ill effects of some serious volume. Okay, that's my bridge pickup. That was on 9. I'll do it on 10 just for... I never like the sound of it on 10. That's the...
On 10 it sounds really good, but I'm hearing it on my in-ears and it sounds like it's got a little more sparkle.
Well, that's also...
But I imagine where you are, it's probably sounding different.
Here's volume on 9 now with my tone knob full up. So it does do that if you want to, but I just had it maybe backed off around 7 or so. Maybe because I was just playing like John Mayall and the Blues Breakers all week, kind of.
So in that guitar, that's a Les Paul that you've got. Have you got 50s wiring in it? So you can, or you've got the 50s and 60s.
Yeah, 50s on the neck and 60s on the bridge.
Ah. That's a cool way to do it. I remember you telling me that you'd done that on a few guitars.
On the neck, it cleans up really nicely. The problem with 50s wiring is when you dump your tone down, it loses a ton of volume as well. So on the neck pickup, I'm less inclined to use the tone control on that one. So I just, prefer the nice sparkle you get when you turn down. And
that's really where you want it, isn't it? On the neck pickup.
And if you need more sparkle, there's always, the good old treble booster.
I'm curious what happens in the middle position with that wiring. Do you get the best of both?
I'm not sure. They seem to balance pretty well because it does that trick where you put one on full and back off the other. And you get this. That's with neck on full and bridge backed off a little bit. Now do it the other way around, bridge on full, neck. See, it does. You can hear that mid-range change, right?
Yeah. That's one of my favorites, man, because you can take a bridge pickup which might be thin and just fatten it a little bit as you. Yeah. I've been actually using that on the DGT quite a bit because I'm using that on the show, and it's got 2 volumes, which I haven't had for quite a while on any of my guitars. Right. It catches me out a little bit. I switch to the middle position and I forget that one volume's still up. But there's one song that we do anyway. And then that one, I actually run my bridge pickup full up and my neck pickup backed off, and it's just such a creamy tone. So I'm actually using that quite a bit on that guitar now, which was a surprise to me.
Cool.
But yeah, that sound you just had then, that's the one, I reckon.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorites, especially into some sort of Marshall-esque type amp, So you're going to take that to the jam. How loud do you think you'll be able to get it at this jam session? Is it going to be like
the post-phase inverted master volume at the back, so maybe around halfway on that should do the trick. Because we don't really play that loud, but the room's quite big, so you may get away with a little bit of volume. And there is an ISO booth in that studio as well. So what I sometimes do is I'll put the cab inside and keep the door half open.
I didn't realize you had a master volume on the back, because I was going to say to get that kind of volume and sound is quite tricky.
It's not going to happen with that, like full blast now. Because even with like a loud band at times, a 50-watt Marshall was a little too loud.
Oh yeah, it'll bury them, if you really want to.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it? Did you see that pedal show this week where they did? There was a video they did the other day where they said the greatest amp of all time, and it was a deluxe reverb, of course, which I kind of expected. But interestingly, have you played an old deluxe reverb?
Briefly.
Like a vintage one?
There was a shop in London that had one, but I didn't really get it done and up to where it was, going to give up the goods.
The reissues don't sound like the old ones.
they don't.
They're not even close to being in the same ballpark. And I kind of thought, I left a comment on there and said it's a real shame that Fender did a reissue and did it with a circuit board and did it, didn't make it like the originals. They sound decent, but they're only 90% of the way there. Because I've played a bunch of vintage deluxes in the States, and maybe two running on 110 makes a difference.
Yeah, it does.
Instead of 240. But man, they're glorious when even the non-reverb version, just the regular deluxe from the black panel ones, it's killer. But yeah, what would be for you would be the 1 amp, like the greatest amp of all time, do you reckon?
Probably think of 1968 Super Lead 100.
Interesting, eh?
Yeah.
Because to me, I wouldn't have said deluxe even though they said deluxe. I mean, I kind of get where they're coming from because it's the right volume to kind of get a bit of push if you need it. For me, I would have said one of two, either a Tweed Deluxe or a Tweed Bassman. Probably a Tweed Bassman, I would think, is the greatest amp of all time because there's no Marshall without the Bassman.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And also the birth of rock and roll because of Elvis and Scotty Moore and that whole thing that he used to Tweed Bassman, you know what I mean? And I don't know if you've ever turned up a Tweed Bassman. They're terrifyingly good. It's one of the most fun things ever. Turn it up on about the old Greg Koch thing where you turn everything up on 7. And that's just glorious. Yeah.
I mean, just in terms of the influence on the music that I listen to, that's why I kind of, chose the 100-watt Marshall. It was like the quintessential one. Though for my generation, like growing up, I could say the same about the JCM 800, the single channel 2203, because that was on heaps of very influential, albums that I grew up listening to. I could also say the Soldano because that's kind of a more idealized version of that circuit with, 2 switchable channels. And I could also say the custom audio, at least for me, we've got like one great Fender twin kind of a thing and a Marshall slightly hopped up Plexi on the other side. So
I had one of those custom audios as well. I should never have sold it.
Never.
Sold it to some guy in Auckland and I wished I hadn't, But I needed, usual story, you sell it to fund something else that you... Yeah. And I wasn't using it that much, which is funny with gear. Just leave it in the corner of the room and just, if you can, do you know what I mean? Try not to sell stuff.
There's something interesting about this amp. I don't know if I told you before. It started off as a 50-watt bass Plexi in 1986 circuit. But then I found I never used a normal channel because it's so dark in this amp. So I said, well, let me try and turn that one into as much of a super lead as I can without changing the bass circuit. So there's a couple of things like I added a bright cap on it, which that channel doesn't have. And there's one capacitor before it hits the part where the 2 circuits mix that lops off a bit of bass. So I did that. So you kind of have a more, lead style, very early lead style on this channel, which is normally your normal channel. And this normal bright one is your bass circuit. So
did you do that yourself or did you take it to someone?
It was just soldering 2 components. I did it.
Yeah, but I don't know about getting inside an amp myself. I'm so worried about electrocuting myself.
With the Marshall, here's the trick. You got to have it like on full, right? And first you switch off the standby, okay? And you hear that first fade. Then there's a second rush of current. And you just keep playing till
you're taking it out of the capacitors, right?
It's draining all the capacitors. So and you still, check it with a multimeter to make sure that the caps are not like, holding any voltage.
Because it literally, for anyone listening, there are lethal voltages in there that can stay in the caps.
I've done that before.
You can kill yourself. Yeah. Have you really? Oh, no.
There was this one.
That's why I don't go in there. I'm like, nah, I'm not going to touch it.
You can't tell that to like a 14-year-old kid probing inside. I had no idea, right? I learned the hard way. I got this.
You're lucky to be here then.
I got this like, it felt like someone hit me with a bat or something behind. I turned on and there was nobody there. I was like, shit, I think I just got zapped.
I had it about a year ago, but not from an amp, from a power socket in our house actually. I was using in the kitchen and I had wet hands and I didn't think about the fact I had wet hands and I flicked the switch and it must have had water that went down the switch and then connected to it and I felt this through my whole body and I was like, holy shit, like it was painful, like, just jolted my whole body. And I got a friend who's an electrician, and he said go and see a doctor and just go and get checked up. He said because it could throw your whole heart off, and luckily I was okay, but it was bloody scary, man.
Someone told me, and I don't know how true this is, that apparently American voltage is more lethal. It's not because of the voltage, because of the hertz. The 60 cycle, that apparently is more likely to take you out than a 50 cycle. I don't know why or whatever, but if anyone knows, please let us know in the comments.
I think the difference between 110 and 220, 240, whatever, at that point it doesn't make any difference either way. If you get a proper shock, you're potentially dead.
Yeah.
Right?
They're just saying statistically the number of times, if you get zapped so many times, the American thing will kill you more times than...
Yeah, you're twice dead instead of once dead.
Exactly. So here's the bass channel on the neck pickup. It's more akin to like... It's got all that fatness inside.
That's nice.
Yeah, and there's
that'd be really good on the treble pickup.
It would. And that's the reason I got this amp in the first place, because all the Marshall things I tried were like more lead style. I was like, no, I kind of prefer the bass circuit more. And the bass circuit does take pedals a little nicer, I found.
Actually, that'd be a really good sound with the Telecaster too, because you've got the bright, twangy pickup, but the fat sounding amp, right? It's all about balance. So is that the treble booster on, or which one did you switch?
Yeah, it's the full tone Ranger. So right now it's on the... Oh, this one's nice. It's got a setting on mids, which is kind of like the most balanced.
Yeah. That's great.
The full range sound is more like a fuzz.
Interesting, isn't it, that it actually sounded better with your volume off just a touch to take that, which is similar,
and this is
similar to a fuzz pedal, isn't it?
Yeah, and this is the thinnest setting, which is quite useful if you're doing some double tracking. Remember we talked about cutting all the low end on a layer and stuff, so I use that very rarely, but it's got these...
Do you ever run an EQ pedal into it?
Into the
shape
thing, it doesn't really like anything before it. You could EQ after it, but what happens is before it, then that whole impedance connection between the pickups, when you turn your volume down, that gets affected. So it always likes being first in line, which is why I don't.
I was going to say, because that is the sort of sound you could shape with an EQ in kind of interesting ways.
For sure. And I think there's a couple of pedals that kind of use that effect. The Area 67 from Dryber. They have a compressor and a treble boost kind of a thing together, which, you get this sparkly, clean kind of thing happening as well, which is quite nice. And here's another interesting one, which is it started off the circuit called the Screddy screwdriver, and then it morphed into this one called the hybrid fuzz driver. So it's got this knob here, which lets you take off all the low end. That's your volume, that's your fuzz. There's a presence, which is kind of like an overall tone thing, and there's a mid boost into the fuzz, which is quite cool. So it's almost like two pedals in one if you look at it. The fuzz is on this guy and the mid boost, so you can keep the fuzz off and just use it as a mid boost, or you could do it vice versa, or you can combine the two. So that's our volume on 8 or so. This is with no mid boost. Take that off all the way. As you can see, I haven't used it in a while. You get that?
With that mid boost on, it kind of reminded me of Jimmy Page.
That's
that
exactly what it was kind of shooting for. I think that guy, even the font and stuff, it looks like some Led Zeppelin style thing. So now we'll tighten up the thing still further because it's still a little farty on the low end. So this is just a little bit past noon. So I think between these two pedals, I should have more than enough.
Oh, I love it.
For today.
And the verb that we're hearing, is that coming from the aux? Or
No,
because
that's
there's no
the
verb on the amp,
trusty
obviously.
lexicon in the rack.
And you're going to take that today or not? Or is
Nah,
the room big enough?
The room's big enough, so you don't really need much reverb. I was listening to it through the cab throughout the week, and it was fine. Should we need it?
That's an interesting thing with a deluxe reverb, a Tweed deluxe reverb. Tweed deluxe non-reverb, because the 59s didn't have reverb.
Yeah.
You don't need it if you're in a room that's decent. And actually, you don't really need it that much anyway, because the amps were designed to kind of resonate in their own kind of way, whereas the black panel ones were really quite rigid chassis that didn't resonate.
To be honest, let's listen to it without the reverb, because it just comes on by default in my setup. But here's like bone dry. Oh, sorry, hang on one sec. Am I feeding my headphones?
Sounds like there's a little bit of room ambience in the
room
aux,
is on
maybe.
the one sec.
Which is cool, because you would never play something totally dry.
The room is on the
anyway.
aux. Still holds up on headphones, I just like the sound of reverb.
I do too. It makes me play differently too. I find like a sound like that will make me go, and because all that's filling through the gap, I'll play less notes.
Exactly.
Whereas as soon as I take that off, like if I go to here's note, then I'll be like, and I want to play something in that gap.
Yeah. It makes you less conscious,
You see what I mean? It's sort of filling it out and rounding it out, and definitely. I think to most people's ears too, music that's guitar sounds that have reverb, some kind of reverb. I do like recording without reverb, though. I think sometimes if you record a bone dry guitar part, it just can sit in the music a certain kind of way, or not necessarily bone dry, but something like even this. If I go, hang on, I'll just turn the delay down. So here's a 2-second delay, but if I go to a 1-second delay, there's still a reverb on there, but it's I'll turn it up, but it's really short.
Yeah. And here's another trick with the short reverbs. Add around 100 milliseconds pre-delay to that.
Okay. Pre-delay 100 milliseconds. Okay, that's 100. Kind of sounds almost like a slapback, but it's not.
You can push it all the way till 180. Try that as well. That's like more extreme, but it has a sound.
Quite hard to play with it because it's sort of it's not like a
you
slapback.
have to play with the treble control on the reverb itself. Then if you've got that extreme amount of like a 180 pre-delay, then you have to like shelve off all the top end, so then it doesn't get in the way. You just have this warm afterglow, kind of a very dark slap kind of a thing.
And you'd want it to phase in rather than be hard like that, because it's not multiplying your guitar like a delay would, because it's a reverb. It's sort of it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Reverb kind of makes your guitar sit back in the mix, whereas delay makes it multiplies with your notes and makes it sit forward. So that's why slapback is quite different from that. But yeah, that's a cool sound. I like that.
Yeah, around 100, it's nice and subtle. 80 to 100 or so.
Yeah, that's the London plate in the Fractal, which is basically modelled off the Abbey Road one, I assume. So yeah, it's an interesting thing though, isn't it? That sort of reverb makes you play a different kind of way, which is what I like. So I often find, especially if I'm playing funk guitar, I actually prefer to practice that stuff with no reverb at all and no delays or anything. So something like this, I'll be. been enjoying playing the Telecaster again lately. I actually changed the pickup and the bridge in this one. I had a JB Junior, which I never liked. To me, they're a crappy pickup, at least in this sort of guitar.
Well,
you know what
I
I mean?
wouldn't put one on a telly. Yeah.
No, I had one floating around, so that's what I did. And I was rummaging through a box of old pickups, and I found the original pickup that came in it, which is a Seymour Duncan. I think it's an Alnico 2.
Right.
And that one there is an Area T, so it's actually a noiseless single coil. So in this guitar, I have noiseless neck, and I have noiseless middle, and then I have the bridge pickup being a regular telly.
Oh, that's cool.
But this pickup's quite bright, so I find that most of the time I just notch back the tone control, and that seems to work.
Have you wired it so that only the bridge pickup gets the tone?
I should actually. That would be really
Super simple
helpful.
mod. Just move the wire to the bridge pickup lug.
Yeah, and then because that's really the only place I'm going to use it. I don't think I'd ever use the. Maybe I would actually. No, that's not true. I probably would if I was going to go for a tone like this. You know.
In that case, you need the 4-way switch. You know that there is a thing like that, right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, so that one
there's a guy in
position is the
Wellington
neck
I
pickup
saw-
with all the tone rolled off. It used to be like a preset jazz sound.
There's a guy in Wellington who's opened a repair store called the Fuzz Doctor.
Okay.
And I've not used his stuff before, although when the DGT arrived and it had issues, the Rock Shop took it to him because he's apparently their repair guy. But I've been following his Facebook page, this guy, the Fuzz Doctor. I don't even know his name. I should suss him out. But he was doing a 4-way telly drop-in.
Right.
So it came with the panel, the switch, 2 controls, 4-way all built in. You literally just solder 2 wires and you're good to go. And I was kind of tempted to try that. I think he had it so that it was bridge, normal telly, and then the extra one was out of phase.
Right.
With the 2, which is kind of an interesting one. But you could actually wire that to be bridge-only tone control. Would be super useful, I think.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of different ones you could, even try with just those 2 pickups. You could run them series in phase, series out of phase, those kind of
Actually,
things.
an easier way to do it would be to just put a little dip switch, an on-off switch, and have your tone control bridge pickup only on the switch. So it sort of it routes it to either that lug or off to the normal spot, so that you could have it like bridge only tone control, then flick the switch up and have it on both.
Yeah.
That would be a good way to do it.
Yeah. Or
because I do like the 3-way thing on the telly, the normal.
Oh yeah, just having those 3 available to you. Yeah, if I had 4 on a Les Paul, I'd go mad.
I saw Leon Todd post a video the other day where he had one that was a regular 3-way like on a Les Paul, but it had 3 along the bottom, and then you flicked it up to the top, and you had 3 along the top as well. So it actually had 6 on a regular, what would look like a 3-way switch, almost like a car gearbox where you have rows of. And I thought that's kind of interesting. Like, I wonder how that works. Like in practice, do you? Oh, I'm in that setting, or would you know? I guess you would.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I don't know if you've tried that one.
There's enough stuff to get confused by already, I would think,
I know, right? Don't want to make it harder.
Yeah,
That's the thing with guitar too. Is like I'm finding more and more the simpler you make it, the better.
Yeah.
Which is one reason I like Telecasters so much. Is it's a simple guitar. Do you know what I mean? And not having too many options. Have you ever played a single pickup, like an old Les Paul Junior or anything like that?
No, I haven't had any one of those. I actually, one sec. No, I may have played an SG Junior with the 1P90. I've played that before. That's a nice sounding guitar.
Yeah, I went and I did one of those what they call open counselling sessions at Musicians Institute in LA. And basically what they do is they have all the tutors come in, and they instead of doing guitar lessons, what they do is they leave the door open, and anybody can come in and have a lesson, and then they can move on to the next tutor, which might be Scott Henderson down the hall, might be whoever, and usually they have a guest artist. So I was the guest artist that day. So, and I was in one room, and Alan Hines, I don't know if you know Alan Hines, was in the room next door. So Alan was like, "Oh man, just come through and we'll do it together, eh?" So I was like, okay. So I went through, and we just ended up playing for the time, and there was about 10 students that came in. And they come in for a little bit, they'd ask some questions, and they'd go to the next guy and the next guy, and it was quite a cool way of doing it. But Alan had a 59 Les Paul Junior with a single P90, and he'd just had it refretted with big frets, and so it played really well and it played in tune. And man, that guitar just changed my whole thinking, because I always thought one pickup in the bridge, I was like, stink, now you're really limited. But actually, it was the opposite. It was like the amount of tones you could get with just the controls, and because you had no pickup selector. The other thing too that people forget about is in those Les Paul Juniors, if you have the second pickup, the neck joint is really compromised now, because you've got a router spot right here where that thin neck joint is anyway. But the Les Paul Junior with one pickup, all of a sudden now the neck joint is really solid, and so you get more sustain. And that thing, because it didn't have the magnetic pull of the pickups, you played a chord and it just rang for days. It was ridiculous. Big fat tone. The top end was really shimmery. You could dial it back, and get it. You could actually get a fairly decent jazz tone just by pulling back the
tone.
Not jazz tone, but by pulling back the tone control, you could really make it work for that sort of sound if you wanted that sort of thing. It was changed my whole thinking about it. And then like a couple of years ago, I saw Alan say, I sold that. And I was like, no, I would have bought it. It was freaking awesome. Yeah, it was a Les Paul Junior 1959, so that quite big neck. The other thing I saw last night too about big necks was that company Warmouth?
Yes.
I don't know that make parts. The guy on there did a video where he showed two guitars, and because I've been thinking about making a parts caster for something I've never done before, but he was talking about he got a Strat and he got two necks made, and they were made from the same piece of wood. He fretted them with the same frets, same tuners, everything, and as close as he could, and he made one with a 59 round neck, like big, the biggest neck they make, and then he made one with what they call Strat thin or something, or very thin, like not the thinnest neck they make, but closest to. Man, you could hear the tonal difference. Like, it was quite surprising. Like the bigger neck sounded bigger and rounder and fuller.
Right.
I mean, granted, you still want to make it whatever's comfortable for your hand, but it was really noticeable, like how different the tone was just by the thickness of the neck.
Yeah, when I bought this guitar, the Ishibashi listing, it said this guitar's got a nice chunky neck, which gives it a nice fat sound. So I was like, must be some, advertising bloody bullshit. And I actually got it, and it's true. I mean, it's like one of the nicest Les Pauls I've played. And I've played like not a 59 or whatever, but some really nice, like high-end custom shop, all the Murphy Lab stuff and all in the stores. And this one, I don't know why, it just, at least to me, I was like, that's it. I don't really need to be looking for another one of these. My
Les Paul's by that. I've got a studio Les Paul that I've had for 20 years ago, which is the one without the binding. It's basically the same. But that's got a big chunky neck. It's 59 neck, and that's one of the best Les Pauls I've ever played. It's what they did with those studio ones too, is no binding, and they put a really thin finish on it.
Right.
The idea being that, if you're playing in a studio, it doesn't have to look as pretty, but they sound better for it.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons I like this guitar too. This is a Highway 1 Telecaster, which is, again, the nitro finish and really thin. So it scratches easy, but they sound better for it. As soon as they cake the finish on, they don't sound as good. And maybe that's the thing with that guitar too, that's just, you know what I mean? Maybe that day they were a little bit heavier handed with the sanding and, when they were polishing it up and so on, and that can make all the difference in it resonating properly, right?
The Tele I'm still holding up for is like a nice, I had one of those Japanese ones, but I ended up trading it for an Yngwie Malmsteen Strat, which I had for a while. So it's like a black, the custom with the binding, and and the rosewood neck. I think that'll be my ideal Tele. So yeah, I'll find one day, hopefully.
I really like the Telecustoms too, the 60s look, whether it be a 60s one or not as well. Yeah, I agree. The Jason Isbell Telecaster is one that I've seen that looks like it's built off that. Cool. Yeah, it's funny though, isn't it? Once you find one, like for me, this is the Telecaster that I like. And I wasn't really happy with the pickup until I put this one back in. And I never liked it when I got it, but now that I've found that if I just bring the tone control back, that gets it in the ballpark of where I want
It's
it.
amazing how the right pickup will just make a guitar come to life sometimes.
Totally.
Yeah.
That was what's interesting watching those Warmouth videos too, is like not only did the 59, like the guy did a whole bunch of comparisons. So the bigger neck, he also did 2 necks where he compared a regular scale 25.5 to a 25 3/4 conversion neck on a Strat. And I would have thought that made a bigger difference than it did. It really didn't make that much difference in his comparison, which, it was all things considered. It was cut from the same bit of wood. And he did a bunch of really interesting comparisons that kind of changed my whole... He did one where he got a Strat body made of alder, and another one, I think, made of poplar.
Okay.
And the difference wasn't really that noticeable. Like, I mean, it was like a little bit, but... and he did another one that was alder and mahogany, I think.
Right.
And again, it was less than I thought it would be.
Did you do alder and ash by any chance?
He did an alder and ash one too. Yep. Again, it wasn't that as noticeable as I thought it would be. I thought it would be like night and day difference, but I think all these things add up.
Right.
I think that's the key of it. The pickups are probably one of the biggest things that makes the biggest difference. And I think everything else makes a difference, but it's like it adds up.
Yep.
If you have the big neck plus the mahogany body, the neck construction, the scale length, and you do all these things in a certain kind of way. The neck angle probably makes a difference too. The headstock angle makes a difference, and you do all these things and it adds up,
I've heard a couple of people say like they've changed necks on a guitar, and the tone seems to travel with the neck more than the body.
Yeah, I've seen John Suhr say that he thought the neck, the fingerboard material mattered more than the body material. He was saying to him, it's like, well, the thing he hears when he hears any guitar is either maple cap or rosewood cap.
Yeah.
And I thought that was interesting. And when you think about it, like I've tried that a few times where I've just strummed guitars and I've sort of moved my ear around to see where the sound's coming from. Certain guitars, it sounds like there's a lot of sound coming off
the neck,
front of the finger, off the neck, yeah. That's what's happening acoustically. Now, I don't know how much of that translates to pickups and things, but I'm sure it does.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to put like a transducer on the headstock and see what happens there. Should try that sometime.
You're the guy to do it.
I've got a million other experiments that I have on the list.
Tell me about it. Exactly.
Well, I was just curious.
I kind of want to know
that Bassman you mentioned. What speakers do you have in that amp? Or what did it come with?
Jensen's.
Archer. And those
Jensen's,
are those Alnico ones, right?
Yeah, the Jensen Alnicos. They're the reissue ones. But when I got it, they were well broken in because I bought it off Darren Watson.
Right.
And Darren had played it for a couple of years, pretty hard because he was a blues guy, kind of likes to crank it. And so they were well broken in, which was nice, Because when they're not broken in, those Jensens are pretty... Nasty, they can be a bit ice picky and nasty. Yeah, which is partly why I think the speaker is the biggest change in any amp, I think.
Yeah.
It really is. And a difference between a broken-in speaker or not. A friend of mine, Lee Jackson, I don't know if you know Lee, lives in Wellington. He just bought a Celestion Creamback, I think it is, the white, creamy-coloured speaker. It cost him about $800 or $900 to get one. And put it in his deluxe reverb, which had a Jensen before, I think, or a Celestion, one or the other. And it was like night and day difference in terms of the amp.
Yeah.
And he bought it second hand for about that price. And actually it changed the whole amp. And of course it was already broken in, so he didn't have to do anything,
Yeah. Do it.
Yeah.
Even this cab, I think it came with the H30 speakers, which sounded nice. They seem to be...
H30? What are H30? Not V30?
No. They are G12 H30, 30-watt anniversary, 70th anniversary or something like that. You remember those? Then they also have a greenback version of that. It's basically the G means it's guitar, 12 is a 12-inch, and then the magnets go from S, M, H, small, medium, heavy. So the greenback that we know is, I think, a G12 M25. And this was a G12 H30. So nice speakers. Apparently Hendrix recorded a lot with those speakers. or at least the original ones. These were some reissue types. So the friend of mine has like a whole bunch of vintage 30s, and he wanted to try something different. So I grabbed a couple of vintage 30s off him. And in my Bogner 4x12, I've got 2 vintage 30s on the bottom and 2 G12 65s on the top.
Yeah.
Because it was an Uber cab. It had 2 G12 75s, like, and an X pattern with the vintage 30s. So I pulled out the 75s and, sold them off, and I had these 65s. So I figured that's a good combination. So the Cert 2x12 had 2 G12 65s in it. So I said, what if I took one from there and we made like both the cabs with, the same kind of complement, with one, 65 on top and a vintage 30 at the bottom, and that like side by side. So it gives them both like, a different speaker to mic as well. And especially in this cab, like if you had a vintage 30 on the top, it may be a little harsh, but you've got the warmth of the 65, and then the vintage 30's got that cut on the bottom, coming through. So you can mic that if you want a, more punchy rock sound or whatever.
Yeah, mismatching speakers can be a really great way of doing it. I used to do that with a 212 cab that I had. I had a vintage 30, and then I had a G12 75, next to it, which are 2 of the standard kind of speakers that people would use. Yeah. But super useful for recording, because you put 2 57s on it, and now you had very different speakers, so they were coming out of the same cab, and it was an open back Marshall 212, which I quite liked. It sort of had a different sound than the closed back thing, but it had a removable mid panel, so you could take it out, you could have it either way. And I experimented with it a bunch of times, and I preferred it open back in that particular cab. Yeah. But yeah, mismatched speakers, it was kind of interesting, And then when you stood in a certain place and you heard both of them, it was glorious. Yeah. But if you stood to one side or the other, it was sort of, wasn't as good.
It's in a horizontal 212, you kind of want to match the efficiencies of the speakers, because if one is like 3 dB louder, then it's kind of going to overpower the other one. In this case, I think the 65 is 3 dB softer than the vintage 30, but since it's in the up, it's not that much of an issue. And plus it's, beaming up at you, which is probably a good thing.
And it can make a big difference in volume, the efficiency of a speaker. Yeah. My Tweed Deluxe, when I first bought it, it came with the Eminence Legend, which is the speaker that Mark from Victoria always uses. And I actually ordered it with a Jensen, because I wanted it like an old Deluxe, And he was like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I ordered it." He goes, "I just sent it with the speaker. It's like my stock speaker. It's actually my favorite." So I was like, "Oh, no worries." And I actually found a Weber version of a Jensen, which are like pretty damn good. Mm-hmm. And I bought it and I put it in, and I was like, "Wow, it sounds great," but I lost about half the volume.
Right.
Like literally felt like it was half as loud, and I was like, I wouldn't be able to get over a drummer with this. Like it'd be a real problem. Yeah. Like with the ceramic speaker, it was like just loud enough to compete with the drummer, but with the Alnico, not even close. So I took it out and I sold the Weber, and but now I don't gig that amp so much. I actually thought maybe I should try and pick up another one of those Webers, because for recording it'd be super useful to have the volume down quite a bit.
Someone came up with this invention, I don't know how many years ago. It's basically a speaker with a variable magnet. So you can actually reduce the efficient or whatever the magnetic strength,
twist it on the back of it,
and the volume goes down with it, which I thought was like, that's a different way of looking at it,
Oh, have you ever tried one though? I don't know if they would sound good.
I've just read about it, so just the idea itself seems like intriguing enough, But yeah,
it seems like something that Spinal Tap would do, right?
They probably,
we got an amp capo.
Knowing them, they'd basically juice up the magnet so it gets louder,
Yeah.
The pushover.
I love the amp capo they did where they squeeze the cabinet. It's like those guys were funny as shit. And my favorite moment in that is still though when they're in those egg things at the beginning and they're trying and he's stuck in it and it won't out and he's like, "Let me out." Well, I'm going to have to wrap up. I'm going to have to go. I've got a couple of shows to do today. So
it's been nice to chat again. And we'll see each other sometime soon. Cool. See you guys. And catch you guys soon. Bye-bye.